Hello again, and welcome to Survive and Thrive, the Media Viability Podcast. And as in every episode, we're talking about the multifaceted challenges involved in doing exactly that. Not just surviving, but thriving. I'm Janelle de Malaon. Now, if you lead a media outlet, you would know how much of an uphill climb it can be to operate and produce journalism every single day, while coming up with new ideas and fresh models, despite funding issues, skill gaps, and media literacy questions. Given that, it's helpful for media producers to share their experiences and enrich the collective pool of insights we can all draw from. Our next guest believes in starting young. Abaas Mpindi is the founder and CEO of Media Challenge Initiative. That's a youth-driven nonprofit training the next generation of African journalists. Welcome, Abaas. We'll get into what all of that means in a second, but first, this quick questionnaire. Your business model in a catchphrase.
Thank you so much for hosting me here, Janelle. It's a pleasure. I would say community.
Community. Second question. Did you ever manage a moment when everything seemed lost?
Yes. In 2016, after 4 years of running a volunteer journalism training program, we were at the age of giving up. And one, because we didn't have any funding to run, the programs training young journalists. So we decided to say this is it and this is over. But we were very, very lucky at that point because we started producing these. We got the idea of creating a video proposal, and the video proposal went like, "Hi, my name is Abaas Mpindi. I am the CEO of Media Challenge Initiative. We are writing to you, or we are doing this video to propose a project building the next generation of journalists, and we would love you to provide support and funding." And we included the team, we created some animation, which was like a creative video proposal. And at that point, that was not something that most partners in Uganda had seen before, receiving a video proposal. Most people receive a written text proposal. The video proposal went to different partners, including one, the Conrad Adenauer Stiftung, by then, who got really interested in our idea after watching the video. And they called us to their office and gave us our first grant, which was like on the edge, survive and come back to doing the work that we loved doing. It was 6,000 euros, but that 6,000 euros made us thrive again and made us believe in the work that we were doing when all of us had decided to just call it quits.
Well, who knew video proposals could be so consequential? But here's your third question. What would you need to survive in the future?
So to survive in the future now as an organization, we need investment into a social enterprise arm of the NGO, because what we are trying to at least gear towards a 50% budget sharing and reducing the contribution of donors and relying on donors. Over time, if you're running a not-for-profit journalism program, you want to reach at a level where you can sustain it even after many years when a partner or a donor is gone. And one of the creative ways to do that is, for us, has been create a social enterprise arm. And what is just clear is the content business sells, right? So people want production, people want creative content, people want storytelling, and we have all that. We also have, a training background. So including that as a support system for our newsroom helps us to sustain. So if there's anything that we want to thrive in the future, it's going to be investment in our social enterprise. So that can be equipment, that can be funding, and that can also be capacity building of training our content production to produce high quality content that can be consumed globally.
Thanks for all that, Abbas. So you lead MCI Media Hub, MCI Radio Solutions Now Africa, and you train young journalists within, the way I understand it, it's kind of like a media hub modeled after tech incubators, while also, of
Yes.
course, in journalism. So can you've alluded to it somewhat a little bit, but can you tell us exactly how that business model works?
So we Media Challenge Initiative is a youth not-for-profit based in Kampala, Uganda. Our main work is building the next generation of journalists through training, mentorship, and peer-to-peer experiential learning. We do that through a fellowship program where young journalists come and are recruited from universities and get training. And then the other thing that we do is provide incubation space through a media hub for those that want have innovations. And then we run a newsroom called Solutions Now Africa, which focuses on telling stories, solutions journalism stories that challenge negative narratives about Africa. And then the MCI Radio, which focuses on amplifying youth African voices. Our business model has been one, the first part is, of course, building relationships and partnerships with donor and funding partners who believe in this idea of building the next generation of journalists. And then developing a social enterprise arm for the not-for-profit, which is in form of events, organizing and hosting events at the Media Hub, content production. Those can be documentaries, can be success story telling for organization. And then the last part is training. We offer capacity building to organizations and to individuals through our Media Academy. Now, when we started, I would say in 2021, after the lockdown, we were around maybe a small 10% contribution to our annual budget. Now we have moved that to around 25 through this business arm of the organization. So for us to be able to thrive and say we are viable as a media organization, and of course, even our structure is very different from a typical journalism newsroom because we are an NGO, and under that we have different projects. But for those to survive, you need money. You need you need more than money actually, because you need a community. So we are building a community of young journalists and a community of universities who believe in our work, but who also contribute to our programming in terms of young people consuming and also working with us. That has been essentially how we've created a system that fuels both our not-for-profit work that is not funded by donor agencies or partners here in Uganda.
So you talked about the need for money. Lots of media managers will be able to relate with that, and the need to build a community, and how these are sorts of this is kind of the pillar of the project that you're trying to develop and make viable for the future. What have been biggest challenges to those goals?
Let me speak for the newsroom that we run Solutions Now Africa. One is the idea when we created it, we wanted to focus on like quick, cute, great journalism, video and multimedia pieces that can be consumed on our website and on YouTube. However, to have that team focus on the newsroom content, but then have the same team go to produce the commercial content for the clients is very hard, because they are the same team that they are in the field doing news stories, but you also have to rely on them sometimes to produce documentaries for other clients. And so at first it was challenging because it would reduce on the time we spend on the journalism stories, because we're trying to look for resources and money. So the creative way to deal with that, I had to begin building a production unit that specifically handles clients' work or content for documentaries or rating success stories for clients. So it's very difficult to focus on journalism, and also if you have a very small team and also have that same team be in the market looking for the money.
So, if I understand correctly, you hive this off into two teams. Now, there's a separate production unit that deals with the commercial requests.
Yes. So also one of the things, of course, people ask a lot, in this case, don't you have conflict of interest? And the one way that we've tried not to get there is most of the clients that we work with are value aligning, and we make sure that they don't come into the stories that we do. We only agree on the certain project that we also believe is a good model, that even if we turn that project into a story, it would still pass as a solutions journalism story. So we use solutions journalism to document models that are working, and those models happen to belong to organizations. So in some cases, rather than do it pro bono, as not pro bono, but as a journalist, we also say, could that be done under the commercial arm? And then we add more content for their social media, for other things that our production team can do.
And I suppose, I guess what is important in this case is also to be quite transparent with your audiences about the nature of the cooperation that you have with the companies, perhaps, that
Yes.
are featuring the models. It's like that, your audiences then aren't confused about like what's journalistic output and what's a cooperation with companies.
Yes, so we have to be, one is the stories that are done commercially, we don't even put them on our news website. If we have to do that, then it has to be very, very clear that this story is supported, or this story was done as a success story following this, partnership with this organization. But we have not put any of those stories on our platforms.
Okay, so that's interesting. So we were talking a little bit earlier about your business model and how MCI finances itself. So perhaps you can sort of run us down. You said 25% now comes from the business arm, and the rest is made up of perhaps grants or donations
Yes.
or
Yes.
other revenue.
Yes, so we work as an NGO, work with different donors and partners who fund our programs like training, the fellowship, some of the events that we organize here in Uganda. And so that takes a big bunch of our budget. But we know that anytime the philanthropy landscape is changing due to the different factors ongoing in the world, so we can't entirely give 75% of your organizational budget to these partnerships, which is now it's inevitable because that's the state that we are in. But the work that we are doing is to really aim towards reducing that. We work with dw-akademie, for example. We work with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and some few American foundations to fundraise and do the NGO work that with training young journalists and building the capacity of journalists here in Uganda.
I can imagine that all of this must have taken quite a bit of time to develop. It must have taken quite a bit of time and resources to build these relationships and come up with this basket of funding and operational solutions that you have today. Maybe you can take us a bit through how MCI changed over the years since it was founding and how it got to be how it is today.
Yeah, thank you. And I will share that timeline in terms of also how we've moved from, we've slowly started to build like the business side of things. So in 2012, I was a university student, and I started best out of need an inter-university media competition to bring journalism students together. to compete in news anchoring and reporting, sort of like where you'd got like a musical competition, but for journalists, really live on stage. And it was really to help, media industry to scout talent and build talent from there. And we organized that for 4 years as a volunteer organization until 2016, when we transformed into a fully registered organization working with different partners. And in that case also, that's when we started to build the infrastructure of Media Challenge Initiative into one, the Media Academy, which was offering trainings that are paid for by young journalists who didn't qualify for our fellowship programs. And that's the moment we started to think about how to create the business arm of the organization. And when we started when we received in 2020 funding to create the MCI Media Hub through dw-akademie again, the structure changed dramatically into demanding more resources, and that allowed us, with the space that we have, a radio and a TV studio and an event space and training rooms, to use the hub in three ways. And I always share this with most people who are struggling probably with the viability issues. Like, when you have space, there are many ways you can use the space. So the first, for example, we have a radio studio. The radio studio is used by our radio presenters to do radio shows. But it's also used for us to provide paid for trainings for anyone who wants to learn how to do radio. But at the same time, it's used to produce podcasts for organizations that want to produce podcasts for their platforms and everything. When we have events, it becomes an event space. So we created a multi-purpose center that anytime the TV studio can be a training room. And today you could come and you find that it's a TV studio where people are doing news anchoring and reporting. The next day you will find people doing trainings there, and it's a hired space. And another day you will find that the same room is being hired by a company to produce a talk show program for like a week. So being able to use the space creatively to allow us to achieve our vision of building the next generation of journalists, but at the same time also generate revenues through the different. And the same thing with our production equipment, the same cameras and computers and that we use for production, pre and post production. We use the same for training young journalists and build their capacity and share them with the media industry for employment. So in that case, that's how we've transitioned. And now, recently, we have acquired I would say, a bus, like an SDG media van. It's a sustainable development goals media van. It's a media van that is a newsroom. It's a podcast studio, mobile podcast studio that goes to communities to document stories with other journalists, sort of like take journalism to the people, drive it to the people, get people to have conversations in the bus and talk about issues. But the same van can be used by an organization to also do community screening of movies, training local radio presenters, and it can then generate resources. So we try as much as we can for each and every infrastructure we put in place to think it can't, like, if somebody invests in it, maybe 50,000 euros, it should get to a level where it can just finance itself. And that's where we are pushing for, creating like new roles within our system. For example, even if you're an NGO, you need a sales and marketing team at this time. And what that means is that you have to hire somebody to do that. And in traditional NGO, most people will be like, we don't need a sales and marketing team. But in our case, we do, because we have to get more clients or even on retainer to use our production services. So that has been the transition, and then how we've been thinking about each and every moment as we grow, and how we are able to incorporate different ways of surviving and thriving.
Well, that's the goal, isn't it? And clearly, this it's never going to be the most straightforward path, right? Like, you're trying to do something different here, and your solutions will they will be kind of out of the box. You're not confronted with the same problems that everyone else is confronted with. But I wanted to bring up this point of, you've talked about multi-purpose rooms, you've talked about the many different parts of your organization that they all have to kind of work in concert with each other and contribute different things. But I can also imagine this has the function as well, and I think the intention of bringing many kinds of different people together and many kinds of different functions. You've highlighted the role of community and how important it is. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. What does community mean to MCI, and why is it so relevant for your purposes?
Community for me is personal, because I come from, grew up, with my grandmother, extended family. And you see the importance of being raised by uncles and aunties, and you're like a village child. So that as a value system in any African setting, and especially here in Uganda, is that if you don't sort of like incorporate that community value into your business, it's going to crumble. Because people own businesses, people believe in businesses, because they think and feel like, okay, we are part of it. So part of our work, or at least part of my work as the CEO of MCI, is to build the community of Media Challenge Initiative, community of young journalists. We have a whole active alumni program that engages young journalists who have been through our program. It's not about now, it's about like 20 years from now, where those young journalists are going to be, the positions they are going to hold, the leadership values they will, be able to spread around the world. I'm thinking about, 20 years from now, that community being, probably 1 million. And where will they be? What powers will they have to influence what policies? As a community, if they stick together, they can create change in their communities. Even right now, they have outreach programs that they do together. They have trainings, professional development trainings. They have fun activities. And the community has turned into a therapy space for most of them, who are probably dealing with, mental health challenges. They know that there is a community that supports them. Now, when it comes to, the subject of the day, of course, which is media viability, here people have even like fan clubs for radio stations, in a community where people say, this is the fan club of this radio station. Why? Because they feel they belong to that radio. And so when it comes to, they will believe in your news, they will believe in your stories, because you have developed trust over time. So community is not just community, it's also about trust. It's also about, knowing that as a media platform, you're not only there when they are in need, but you're also there when they are celebrating. And especially that for us as journalists, we need to know that, especially even now with digital platforms, building small communities online that consume your work every day helps, because community then becomes money.
You said in 20 years, your community is probably going to be 1 million. Where are we now?
So right now we have around 3,000 young people who have
3,000.
gone through our trainings. Probably 1 million might be too much by then, but I'm thinking about, if we are able to sustain the programs that we have now and get more programs training young journalists in different communities, what impact we can we can create through the reach that we have. And now with the different projects driving, the van in the community. So there is a core community that you build that is, for example, people who have gone through the same fellowship. But then there is also extended community where you have trained this person for like one time. They associate themselves with MCI because they learned something. So the numbers grow sporadically through different ways, through different engagements. And so before you know it, that's why I was talking about like 1 million. But in terms of like the core community right now that we're working with, for example, we have different segments. We have a fellowship program. People have gone through the fellowship for the last 5 years. That's pretty much around 180 people. And their impact is very, very big in the media industry because these are young news anchors, reporters, writers, editors, producers. That in itself, even if you kept it at 180 in any media industry, like as a small industry in Uganda, in the next 10 years, those young people will be in high positions, either as media owners, media editors, managers, and they would have a say on the economics and politics of the country, right? And for me, having those young people now, investing in them now so that we have better citizens tomorrow and better journalists and better leaders in the journalism industry is not just a benefit to the media industry to survive or thrive. It's a huge benefit to the country in itself. And for a continent like Africa, where you have the youngest population, that means a lot in the years to come because there is a ripple effect that comes with this kind of investment. Now it looks like, okay, it's a small fellowship program, but it changes that person's life for years and years, and it also changes their family. It changes, their children that they will have. And so when we're doing these programs, it looks like a now journalism skilling program. You work on the radio, you work on solutions now, but it's a lifetime.
Yes, of course. It's like this is the thing with change. It can start incremental, and of course, it can compound over time. And when young journalists come to you for training, what do you find is the biggest the biggest issue you have to work on? I would imagine, for example, that a lot of training has to be done on media literacy. I can imagine media literacy to be a top topic whenever dealing with the very young, those who perhaps still have yet to understand the full importance of trying to build resilient media institutions. What can you say about media literacy among young aspiring journalists in Uganda?
For us, media literacy is, of course, even the journalism skilling is still media literacy, but the idea of understanding how the media works and the power that the media has to break or make communities, and the power that journalists themselves have, and how they can fall prey to, dictators or rich wealth people that have their own interest and use that to create, chaos in communities. So we train them first and foremost to understand the power they have and how they will be targeted and how they can be abused and how they can be used by different players. And then the next thing that we also then do is that once you understand the power that you have as a journalist, you also need now to understand the skills that you have to, as a media literate journalist, to change the world. And then the other part, of course, which is typical now, is on training around fact checking, dealing with misinformation and disinformation, and how you can build the capacity of communities as a journalist to create a media literate public. Because we know that the stories that we do as journalists can make the public more media literate, but they can also be, once the public is literate media-wise, they can consume and demand better journalism and quality journalism, and they can pay because now they know why that information is important. They know the role of the journalists in the community and why they are important. So, and I think also the media literacy for journalists also for us has a whole component of training our young journalists to understand the business behind the media so that they know that each story is a cost, that there is a cost to each interview that they do, and that as they do that, they understand that there's money invested, and that whatever story they do at the end of the day is going to be consumed. And if they do a very, very good story that gets, spotlighted and gets, conversations and gets communities talking and gets action out there in terms of policy, they draw audiences to the media house. So that's an understanding that they need to know from the beginning, that it's important that they know the business rather than just storytelling.
I think this is a really important point that often gets lost. Obviously, being in the media comes with a certain kind of influence, and this is influence to be wielded responsibly and judiciously. I wanted to go back to something that you said very early on in our conversation about how it was important to you to use your platform to dispel negative stereotypes about Africa.
Yeah.
What are we talking about there, and how do you do that?
We're talking about pretty hundreds and hundreds of years of blackmailing the continent as diseased, as poverty-stricken, as devoid of potential, as a place where you can't invest. And there is so much implication over the years that we've seen that Africa is treated as a charity case. And years of not just media in terms of journalism, but media campaigns that have been done by aid agencies throughout, 60s, 80s, and 90s, and even years before that. So we are just doing sort of a catch up to say the way the world sees and interacts with Africa is highly dependent on the stories people have consumed in the movies, in the papers, in project adverts, and all these campaigns in the media. And if people have a negative view of the continent, if they wanted to invest, with young Ugandans, they think negative first. They say, "Oh, you will never make any money from that because this is what's going on." So what we're trying to do is let's change how people see the continent, because we're not saying we want positive stories. We are not saying we want one-sided, positive stories of. We're saying we want the whole story. We want what's not going well, but we equally want what's going well. And there is efforts of young Ugandans and young Africans, and even governments and NGOs and different stakeholders working to change the different challenges on the continent, and we don't see that spotlighted in the media, right? And so our newsroom, Solutions Now Africa, focuses with a huge bias on things that work on the continent so that people can see. And also, I think we are emphasizing also from an advocacy perspective when it comes to the conversation on media viability is that if you're a media platform and you continue portraying any group of people as less than, you are basically also eating into your money. How? Because we see you, people will call you out on Twitter, and people will boycott your platforms. So if you claim to be, for media freedom, for example, you should be actually seen to provide that freedom to each and every in a fair and just way. If you're marketing to your sponsors and advertisers and say you have reach in Africa, right? You have a huge reach in African markets. And then the content and news that you have on your platform is only negatively driven and so and there's never show of there is actually potential or there's it shows like that's basically double standards which we are trying to call out and say change that. Like you're making money out of those communities through different ways, so you can as well give
Recognize
back.
their full humanity, perhaps.
Yeah, for humanity's sake at least, right?
Alas, this was very interesting, and we can talk all day long about these things. You clearly have so much to share, but we're getting to the end of our time now, and before we let you go, we want to ask you whether you have three best practice tips for any of the media managers out there who might be open to learning about your experiences. Three.
So for me, three. The first one is people first. No one wakes up to go online to look for problems. So the whole idea of problem-centered reporting can be reviewed. We still need, of course, coverage to see these challenges, but people are not looking for problems. So one way to thrive, to make your business grow is to provide solutions to people that they are looking for. So look at the challenges they face and work towards contributing to how they can thrive as a community, because they want you not only to be there when they have problems, they want you to actually be there to help them and support them to get out of those problems. The people first helps you to build the community. Community is very important because people, especially here in Uganda, and I would say some African countries, like, are you for us? Do you speak for the people, or do you speak for a certain group of people? So, and communities can be built by you make a decision, say we'll speak for a certain group of people because that's where we probably get our money, or we represent the issues of the entire community in an objective way. And I know it's very controversial, especially even in places where media houses get money from, let's say, like one source, literally, like 70% of the budget comes from, let's say, the government, and people don't see their voices represented in the media. And my third component would be on creativity around how you use your platforms as well as spaces. So I have shared extensively how we use our Media Hub in Uganda, but also the equipment that you have, the tools that you have, the journalists that you have are more than just reporters. They are influencers. So can you build incredible voices and profiles of journalists to become, an asset for your organization? Are you investing in your journalists to not only be, just be reporters you send to collect news, but to become influential figures that it's not only for now, it's an investment for them for the future, because we know that journalists are the first influencers even before we had the social media influencers that we have today. So I would say invest in journalists, because the quality of journalism that the communities are demanding for comes from journalists who are skilled and journalists who are invested in.
A lot of lessons there, but let's see if I got it all together. So put people first. And people are looking for solutions, not problems, and therefore it's very important to discuss the challenges that people are facing and find solutions towards them.
Yes.
Build the community. Very important to show the community that you speak for the people and not for a certain group of people. And be creative with your platforms and spaces, both online in the real world. So build your journalists, build your community, and the business will come. So
100%. You got it.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I tried very hard. Thank you so much to our guest today.
You're very welcome, Chanel. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you so much. So you are listening to the CEO and founder of Media Challenge Initiative. Thank you, dear listeners. Appreciate you joining us today. Do check out the show note for more. Till next time on Survive and Thrive.
Thanks for listening to Survive and Thrive, the Media Viability Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and make sure to hit like so that other listeners can find us as well. For feedback, send an email to dw-akademie.surviveandthrive@dw.com. You can find all the information in the show notes.